One of the most striking behaviors you will notice in someone who has endured the grip of a narcissistic woman is their silence. At first, this quietness can seem ordinary, even peaceful. But upon closer observation, you discover it carries an unusual weight. It is not the silence of serenity, it is the silence of survival. For years, every word they spoke was subject to scrutiny, every opinion twisted into an offense, every truth turned against them. They learned that the less they said, the safer they were. And so, silence became their shield. This silence lingers even when the abuse is long over. It shows up in conversations where they hesitate to share their thoughts, or in moments where they shrink back instead of stepping forward. It may even confuse those around them. Why so much restraint? Why so much unsaid? Yet, this is not weakness. It is the soul's scar tissue, the echo of battles fought in secret. But here lies the invitation to transform that silence into voice, to reclaim expression as a birthright. For silence may have once preserved them, but it was never meant to define them. The time has come to speak. Another peculiar behavior you will often see in those who have been abused by a narcissistic woman is the habit of over-apologizing. They say, "I'm sorry," not only when they make mistakes, but even when they simply exist, when they take up space, when they dare to have needs or opinions. To the outside world, it seems irrational, almost excessive. But when you understand the psychological conditioning behind it, the pattern becomes clear. In a toxic environment, where every misstep is magnified, apology becomes a form of armor. By apologizing preemptively, they try to soften the blow, to avoid conflict before it erupts. It is less about admitting fault and more about buying safety. Over time, this reflex seeps into every corner of their life, until even kindness from others is met with an instinctive sorry, as if gratitude itself must first be cloaked in guilt. Yet we must recognize that this behavior, while once protective, is no longer necessary. It is the echo of an old battlefield. The task of healing is to replace apology with presence, to stand without shame in one's own humanity. For no one should apologize for simply being. Perhaps one of the most misunderstood behaviors of those who have endured narcissistic abuse is their hypervigilance. To the untrained eye, it may look like unnecessary paranoia or anxiety, but in truth, it is the residue of living in a state of constant unpredictability. When every mood shift, every glance, every subtle change in tone once signaled the possibility of conflict, the nervous system learned to remain on high alert. This heightened sensitivity was not a flaw, but a survival tool. A way of navigating a landscape where the ground was always shifting beneath their feet. Even long after leaving that environment, the habit persists. They scan faces for micro-expressions, interpret silences as threats, and anticipate rejection even in safe spaces. What was once an adaptive strategy becomes a prison of anticipation. They are caught between the past and the present, reacting not to what is, but to what once was. Yet there is also a hidden strength in this vigilance. It can be transformed into deep intuition, into a sharpened awareness of human dynamics. The challenge is not to silence this alertness, but to refine it, to let it serve wisdom instead of fear. True freedom comes when vigilance evolves into vision. Another strange behavior that emerges in those who have been wounded by a narcissistic woman is their struggle to accept genuine kindness. To many, this seems puzzling. Why would a person resist love, compliments, or simple acts of care? The answer lies in the distortion of affection they once endured. What was presented as love was often a disguise for control. What appeared as generosity carried hidden strings. Every kind gesture became a debt, every soft word a trap. Over time, they learned to distrust what should have been life-giving. So when someone now offers them a compliment, they may deflect it, assuming there must be an ulterior motive. When someone reaches out with sincerity, they hesitate, bracing for the hidden cost. Their difficulty is not a rejection of love itself, but a learned defense against betrayal. They are not resisting kindness. They are resisting the memory of its corruption. The path forward requires unlearning this association, allowing themselves to receive without suspicion. For kindness is not always a mask. Sometimes it is simply what it appears to be, a gift. And to receive it fully is to reclaim the trust that was once stolen. To heal is to let love in again. One of the most paradoxical behaviors you may observe in someone who has been abused by a narcissistic woman is the coexistence of strength and fragility. On the surface, they often appear remarkably resilient. They have endured storms that would have broken others, and they carry a kind of quiet power born from surviving psychological warfare. Yet beneath that strength lies a profound sensitivity, a tenderness that can be triggered in moments of closeness or vulnerability. This duality can confuse those around them. How can someone who seems so independent suddenly feel so delicate? The answer lies in the very nature of trauma. Their resilience was forged through necessity, but the cost was an inner world that still bears raw wounds. Strength became their armor, fragility their hidden truth, and both are real, both are authentic. Rather than seeing this as contradiction, we must recognize it as complexity. To be both strong and fragile is not a flaw. It is the full spectrum of human experience. The task of healing is not to erase one side, but to integrate them into wholeness. True power is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the courage to carry both with dignity. Another peculiar behavior, often seen in those who have lived under the control of a narcissistic woman, is the compulsion to over-explain. They feel an almost irresistible need to justify their choices, their feelings, even their smallest actions. It is as if they carry an invisible courtroom within their minds, always preparing their defense before a jury that does not exist. This habit is not born from insecurity alone, but from years of being interrogated, doubted, and accused until the act of explaining became a form of survival. To others, this can seem unnecessary, even exhausting. Why explain so much when no one is asking? Yet for them, silence once meant condemnation. Clarity was demanded not to understand, but to control. And so they learned to anticipate every question, to fill every gap, to leave no room for attack. But this reflex, once protective, now chains them to a past that no longer rules them. The task of healing is to step out of that imagined courtroom, to realize that one does not need permission to exist. Freedom begins the moment explanation is replaced with authenticity. For the greatest justification of your life is simply that you are here.